Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. This week in the news, why are more institutions not following Colorado College and RISD? Kristof will be joining us again, the Assistant Vice President and Dean of Admissions at Colorado College. This is the first of what we're going to continue to do, which is have an actual admission officer as part of our In the News team every third month. And we'll be talking about a hot decision they made. Just jump out of U.S. News and World Report and everything that went into it. No better person to have here than the Assistant Vice President and Dean of Admissions. Lisa and I will continue our question segment in a four-parter, and we're looking at 7 groups of students that are often disillusioned with the college admission process. Why are they disillusioned? What can we do to help them not be disillusioned? And we'll be getting into reasons 2 and 3 of the 7 in part 2 of this four-parter. And we have a brand new interview. And it is with a legend in the world of admissions, Andre Phillips, who is about to enter year 40. And he is the director of admissions at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he'll be helping us to understand UW-Madison. It'll be a four-parter. And then for our spotlight, Kevin Newton continues helping us to understand Australian universities. Friends, you're in for a treat today. Kristof from Colorado College is back. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Mark. It's great to be here. Great to be here with your listeners. So excited.
Yeah. So our regular listeners will remember Karen. She was on the podcast 7 to 8 months ago. We talked about a number of things like how to evaluate a transcript, how do colleges evaluate your high school. And then she did a spotlight for us on Colorado College. We got great feedback on that. And I'm sure our regular listeners know that every fourth month, there is 5 weeks in the month. And so we're going to have Colorado College do it in the news. We get somebody that's right there in the middle of file reading in the committee and give us that real fresh perspective. And Karen's got more than 30 years experience, I believe at 5 schools, or was it 4? I'm trying to test my memories. 5, isn't it, Karen?
It's 5. This is number 5. Lucky number 5. Love it.
Yeah, pretty cool. So we get a vet. She is the Assistant Vice President and the Dean of Admissions. So you deserve a big fancy title after 30 years in 5 schools. and we have a super juicy topic today to get into. As you know, Colorado College is one of the first schools to drop out of the undergraduate rankings from U.S. News and World Report. And we're going to be talking about what goes into a decision like that, pros and cons, and just have a freewheeling discussion. But before we do, we're fortunate to have a pro give us an admissions tip. So every Thursday episode, we have an admissions tip. So what are you seeing out there, reading out there? What do you want to bequeath a nugget for us there, Karen? What do you got?
I love it, Mark. So I'm actually going to keep this sort of thematic because I think one of the things we're likely to get into is how rankings are important or less important, more or less important, I guess you would say, to institutions, and how that aligns with values and priorities, right? I think we're going to get there. I have a feeling we'll get there.
Sure.
And so I want to talk about values and priorities and give you a tip. Students or parents, if you're helping your student, that we often don't think about that when we build college lists. We think, oh, well, I've heard of this school, I've heard of that school, I want to be by the beach, or I want to be by the mountains, or I want to be in the Northeast, or I want to go to the place where someone else went. But I would sort of challenge your listeners, if they're going through the process, or more likely their parents are assisting them in building that list if they're high school juniors, in thinking about why are you going to college to begin with? What are your values? What are your priorities? And how would an institution align with those or not align with those. So why is that school on your list beyond sort of the basics and the superficial? So my tip is to sort of dig deeply, right? Because we think about that from the institutional side, and we certainly hope that students are thinking about that as they think about who they are, who they want to be, how college will transform them, how they'll find a place that will help them grow from where they are to where they'll be at graduation. So think about values and priorities, not just the where, when, how far from home, those kinds of things.
No, that's great. I think as counselors, we try to think of those things, but it's like a tsunami is coming at the families, you know. Oftentimes they're so influenced by peers. So there's what do peers think? Then there's things like family tradition, you know, and it's just sort of like, what have I heard of? And then there can be other influences, sometimes family influences, which can be positive, but sometimes not always coming at it from the perspective you're mentioning. And then a lot of times, especially in private schools and upwardly mobile suburbs, there's just a lot of pressure for status. And so, a lot of times in the school community, that's sort of how validation occurs. And
Sure.
And peers like to feel respected, so they want to go somewhere where they'll feel respected. And so all those things, they all have their place, but they can cloud out what you're talking about, really getting down to the core of like, is this philosophically aligned with who you are and what you're looking for and what you truly believe? So good stuff, Karen. Love it.
And there's a lot of noise too, right? Because we're all sending marketing messages and brochures and emails. So cutting through some of the noise to get at what's really important.
So I'm going to use the you collectively in a very broad sense. You all are pretty bad with that, with the marketing stuff. Like, I mean, I get what you're doing. You're trying to create an admissions funnel. And I get how when you can buy lists of names, that's one way you can get access to the national student body. But boy, it can really create a dilemma on the counselor side when I finally convinced a family that Harvard is not a good match. And then the mail piece comes in. And it's sort of like, I hear you, but I'm going to trust them over you kind of thing. And I know from the institution standpoint, it's you're looking with limited data. So, maybe they have a surge in senior year, or maybe if everything else is right, we can go with that more modest score. But it really can create a dilemma. Do you have any answers for that?
It's such a good question, right? I think part of what I always start with an apology, right? Because I know that we send too much. We try to send it to students we think have something of a shot of getting in.
Yeah.
And we think it's important to send the message about who we are. But I also think we are all complicit in sending way too much, too many times. And I think if you listen to what goes on, around the coffee machine in our office, it's like, I emailed that student 5 times and they didn't respond. Well, I wonder if we're emailing them maybe too much. And so 6 messages are on top of the other 60 they got. I think it's okay to sort of enlist others in this process to help you, like, have a college email address, and maybe you go through and like open the ones that interest you and try not to see an email as an offer of admission, because it's not, right? We got a little bit of data about you. We think you might be interesting. We think we might want to reach out to you, but we're going to stretch that a little bit, right? And remember that just because you get something in the mail or just because you get an email doesn't mean we're sending any messages to you whatsoever about what your chances are for admission, right? I wish there were a better way to do this, but I think we're, it feels like the more one institution sends, the more you have to send in response. And then it is so crowded and noisy, and students are more overwhelmed, and counselors are trying to help them sort of understand what it is that they're getting. So I don't know. I think some active ignoring for the institutions you're not interested in might help us, might get then sort of send a message back to us like, you guys are doing way too much of that, and kind of cool it a little bit in terms of how many and how often.
Yeah, I'm not as troubled by the volume piece. For me, it's more just when when people always have a tendency to look for what they want to see anyway. And people really, in general, don't understand how competitive selective admissions is in general. So they tend to have top-heavy lists. And then highly selective schools, they just cast a wide net with who they mail to. And what I try to point out is like how much the institution doesn't know. Like you haven't seen a transcript.
For sure.
Even a transcript, right? So you really don't.
Right. The basics.
Yeah. The basics. So you don't know grades, grade trends, curriculum. You haven't seen any recommendations. You haven't seen extracurriculars or essays or, discipline infractions or whatever. There's just a tremendous amount of things that you haven't seen. I mean, you may have a self-reported GPA and a test score range and maybe some demographic information. But there's like so many other things that you don't have, and maybe some knowledge of a major that they're interested in, but some of the basics you don't have. And so when that stuff doesn't line up with the student, that they don't hear that. But I don't think we're going to solve that in this conversation.
Unfortunately not, right? But it's such a good point, right? The information we don't have, and that we're going to cast a much wider net than we need to. Like that metaphor that we use all the time of the funnel, right? Wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. Our wide at the top at CC is maybe 80 to 100,000 students. Our entering class is 530.
Yes. So I'm glad you shared those numbers, because I like to point that out as well. Like the percentage of offers that goes compared to how, the list buy, it's pretty minuscule.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up something else that was that I think is really important. And I don't think sometimes the average person has an understanding of just how competitive it is out there. You mentioned it indirectly when you said we're kind of watching what our competitors are doing. Can you speak to that a little bit, Karen? Just the competition?
Yeah, it reminds me there's a road in Colorado Springs called Motor City Drive. And on Motor City Drive, there are probably 10 car dealerships, right? And so if the Toyota dealership's having a sale, the Subaru dealership's having a sale, right? Sure. And then down the road. So I think sometimes it's easy. I think that many of us are in this work not because we're salespeople, right? Not because we're recruiters, because we love working with students. We think education is this incredible value that has transformed our own lives, and we want to share that love and excitement. But we are also a business, right? We are not selling cars on Motor City Drive in Colorado Springs, but up the road on Cascade Avenue in the admission office at Colorado College, we are talking to students about why a Colorado college education is worth every penny. And trust me, it's a lot of pennies that you need to go to CC. So I think we're looking at each other because there is this piece of how we talk about ourselves and how we distinguish ourselves in the marketplace. Why would you go to CC and not to Colorado University Boulder or Colorado State University or Pomona or Amherst or Smith, right? Like we are trying to distinguish ourselves in a very competitive landscape, which I will also own that we created by sending out all these messages, right? So that we hope you'll consider Colorado College, even if you've never heard of it, right? When I worked at Grinnell College in Iowa, we called it the flyover state, right? So whoever lands in Iowa, right? So we were trying to make the case for why you should land in Iowa, what you get at this really special place. And so I think we're all trying to do that. And sometimes you do that by looking over your shoulder at your competition. Where are they? What high school are they giving a presentation? What city are they recruiting in, right? So I think we're both collaborative because many of us travel together.
Right.
We'll give 5 liberal arts colleges and we'll spend half of our presentation talking about what is the liberal arts? What kind of a school is this? What kind of education do you get? How do you translate this into a career? How do you prepare yourself for graduate school? And then we'll spend some time talking about our own individual institution. So we are both collaborative and competitive is how you might say it, right? But I think that for many of us, that is our kind of day-to-day reality is, of course, we're talking about this really lofty, idealistic, awesome, life-transforming education. And at the end of the day, I got a boss too. And I've got certain targets that I need to meet. And I'm trying to meet all of Colorado College's institutional priorities, whether it's about tuition revenue, whether it's about compositional diversity, that we have, athletes for our teams and musicians for our orchestra and all of the things that institutions need to do. So there is there is this element of kind of seeing what other people are doing and making a case for how you distinguish yourself. You want to distinguish yourself, but not be too unusual, right? Because I also think there's a very fine line there, right? We want to
Sure.
you want to be an institution that, we can talk about the block plan or we can talk about our location, but we also don't want to be the place that isn't sort of framing it in the same way that others. Because, at the end of the day, there are a lot of similarities and we're trying to sort of point out the differences, but we all want to be in the conversation. We all want you to drive along Motor City Drive and think about buying a car, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think one place where there's sometimes some misperception, I think a lot of times from the standpoint of the public, they feel like, boy, college is just gotten so hard to get into. And by that, they mean like the colleges I really want to go to. We know that there's a lot of colleges that are not selective. And we certainly, that's true. I'm not saying that's not true, but I think a lot of times people don't see how, from a college standpoint, I'll share something that someone we both know, one of our co-hosts, Julia Esquivel, has shared on our podcast, so it's public knowledge. Their average student applies to 17 schools now. And so I think from your standpoint, you're looking at a student and you're like, okay, you think it's really competitive, but it's competitive for us too, because we got to win that war out of 17.
We actually had someone tell us in their application this year they applied to 51 schools.
Why would they do that?
Right? That would just take up so much of your life and your brain. I mean, how many brain
Well, I'm talking about, for one, why would they tell you too?
Well, there was that, right? This was a student who wanted to be very authentic about, we were one of their choices, right?
Yeah.
But that total. So, we have created a system where I think there is a necessity to apply to a number of places. And Julia and her team, they are awesome. You're awesome, right? In terms of helping families create reasonably sized lists and maximizing opportunities to be admitted. And yet I do think we hear these stories and they're not outliers. 51's an outlier, but 17 is no longer an outlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. And we have, so, we can sit around at conferences and talk to each other and, oh, woe is us for all these applications we have to read and all of this, how many average applications a student is submitting to colleges. But we've also created some of this, and we have to also own our part in fanning the flames rather than trying to sort of say, I think we all go around and say when we're asked, that once you get beyond double digits, there should be a pretty darn good reason why you're applying. But I'm finding myself every year I say that the number's going a little higher, right? Yeah,
because Julia, she shared this on our podcast before. They went from 14 to 17 in a year. Wow. So there's proof of that. And that's coming from the public. That's not what the college counseling office is advocating. But the more people hear it's harder to get in, then the more they think, well, insurance, I need to protect myself. And so that's sort of that vicious cycle. But we could talk about this all day. I want to keep it going here. So our admissions vernacular is it's not admissions vernacular. This is more slang vernacular. I was visiting a college recently and met with one of my students, and they dropped a term on me I'd never heard of before. They were shocked I hadn't heard of it. Have you heard this term, NARP? NARP?
No.
Yes. They're like, Mr. Stalker, you don't know what NARP is? It's non-athlete regular person.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
This happened to be a student athlete. But that she said, oh, yeah, but it's a student who's at a West Coast school, but they attended a Massachusetts boarding school. And they said the term was used there and it's used there. So I guess I'm not up. I guess we're both not hip to the young person's slang.
We definitely are not, but I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I love it. NARP.
It's interesting ways to create different communities on campuses, right? That you would be a group that, and you might be a big fan. Like my alma mater's in the Final Four for women's basketball. That is awesome, right? But you might not be the kind of person that's going to participate, but you're going to be a fan or you're going to be involved in other things. So non-athletic recruit person.
Regular. Non-athletic regular person.
Okay.
As opposed to the contrasting to the athletes. Yeah.
Exactly. What?
Go
Wild.
drop that one on
Wild.
Matt and Mark and
I
Hillary and the rest of the
will.
team.
That's right.
See if they know the latest lingo
Yeah,
out there.
That's right. Oh,
And I'm going to steal our big number from what you said, 80 to 100,000 people starting out with a funnel for 500 spots.
mhm.
That's our big number right there. So
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
our article today is, of course, we've already sussed it out. We're going to be talking about Colorado College's decision to no longer participate in U.S. news, but it's by someone we've returned to many times, Scott Jacek of Inside Higher Ed. And it's entitled, Why Aren't More Institutions Following Colorado College and RISD? So Colorado College and RISD, the two first schools, prominent undergraduate institutions, to say that they would not be participating in U.S. news rankings. And the question says, will more colleges join them? Of course, Reed College was the first one back in 1996 to drop out of U.S. News and World Report's rankings. But I'm talking about in this new wave, since the law schools and the med schools bolted from U.S. News in the last 90 days. And of course, we've been following this and talking about this a lot, so I know our listeners are familiar. More than 20 law schools have now made the decision to pull out of the law school ranks, and then a flood of medical schools. And every week it seems like more people are being added to the list. And the question keeps coming up, well, what about the undergraduate rankings, which are the most popular ones? That's the bestseller. That's the one that gets like 29 million unique hits on their website every year, and pretty much has, been a hot seller since 1983 when the rankings come out. So this article features some quotes from Song Richardson, the president of Colorado College, who really is the one, according to the article, that really made the decision. And so she says, we're pulling out of the ranking because it privileges criteria that are antithetical to our values and our aspirational goals. And then goes on to give a few examples, such as how it equates academic quality with institutional wealth, and how it relies too much on a questionnaire of outside people's opinions. And basically how it has perverse incentives that encourage schools to, what we used to say, buy kids, provide merit aid instead of need-based aid to elevate the profile of your student body. The article goes on to say that Colorado College has been ranked anywhere from 25th to 29th in the past decade. And Richardson says that number may drop based on this decision to leave U.S. News and World Report. And she says if it does, it will not be because our educational quality has changed, but it will be because U.S. News will continue to rank us without using our data. It goes on to also quote Crystal Williams from RISD, the president. She gives her various reasons why they dropped out. Very similar, not mission aligned, not in line with our values. The article goes on to talk about Miguel Cardona, the educational secretary, and he made a quote last week that colleges should not worship at the false altar of U.S. News rankings and should drop out. So it talks about that, and then it also interviews David Hawkins, the chief education and policy officer of NACAC. Basically, he's supporting this decision by the schools and the reasons why they have made it. And then he goes on to say, why are colleges staying put? Why have only 2 schools made the move so far? And one of the things it points out is the role of trustees. It says that more than just a president is required usually to do something like this. And oftentimes you can encounter trustee opposition. Trustees value data, how a college is doing, and they like to boast about a college ranking. Another point it brings out is fear of U.S. News. One president of a non-prestigious college said that Yale and Colorado College have more clout than we do, and they fear offending U.S. News. And that article also points out that some schools have seen an increase recently in their numbers, and they may want to tout that. And so it's basically saying, will more people join? So far, not very many people have jumped on the bandwagon. Of course, this is a very recent decision. And so that's enough of an intro. I don't really want to focus so much on the article when we have you here, but I do want to share one last thing. It does quote James Murphy, the deputy director for higher ed policy at Education Reform Now. He's critical of the fact that U.S. News does not take a look at social mobility enough. He says it should count for 20%. I give them credit. It used to be 0, and now it's at least up to 5. But social mobility is really important, and he doesn't believe that that's something they're doing well. And he highlights schools like the CUNYs, the Cal States, and the University of Illinois at Chicago as schools that are really moving people along that social mobility spectrum. And then he says, the main problem with U.S. News that their function is to confer prestige rather than recognizing institutions that make significant contributions to society through social mobility. So this isn't designed to be a bashing of U.S. News because, as Karen and I were talking about earlier, everybody's sort of looking for outside substantiation of how good you are. The assumption is going to be that, of course, you're going to tell me you're good. That's your job. You know, I had something that I don't recall happening in a long time, Karen, but I just got back from this Pacific Northwest trip where it was Lewis and Clark and Puget Sound, Willamette and Whitman and Reed. And one of the VPs of enrollment, I won't mention which one, he introduced himself as the chief sales executive, you know? And so the point being, it's recruitment, has some similarities to sales. Obviously, it's a nonprofit, but there is a need to convince others that you're good. And people tend to think of you as you're going to give a sales pitch. Of course, you're going to tell me you're good. So I need outside substantiation to really know that you're good because, of course, you're going to tell me that you're good. So my question for you is, what are the pros and cons of being in U.S. News or not being in U.S. News?
Yeah, such a great question. I think that external validation is important. And, we were talking about how complex this process can be and how opaque it is to families. And so sometimes it's easy to want to reduce it to something that is more digestible. I think institutions that are still reporting data to U.S. News and World Report would say it's something of a necessary evil, or it's something that we know that families use, but we never want them to stop there, right? That it's just one place to begin. It's one way to put a school on your list that you had never heard of. No doubt that Colorado College has benefited from being between 25 and 29 since 1983. And so the decision to leave is quite risky. And I think it really does have to align with where you see your institution. And sometimes that is where your institution is now, or in the way that President Richardson talked about it, where we want to be. Because I also think it's really important that we own that we're not better than anybody else on that measure. We have ambitious compositional diversity goals that we haven't gotten to yet. Our Pell Grant numbers could be bigger. There are lots of ways in which we have room to grow in that area. And so I think it really sets up a challenge for an institution to really live its values and to do so in a way that's very consistent with the multiple responsibilities we have in the admission office, which is we've got targets that we're trying to meet. We have an institution that needs to be run. The lights need to be on. Students need to live somewhere. Classes need to happen. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into a decision like this. And having buy-in from multiple constituents is incredibly important. And I think of the president's cabinet, which is generally sort of senior leadership of the institution, and the board of trustees as the places where that buy-in really needs to be abundantly clear, right? That people need to feel uniformly ready to do this, and also ready to devote resources to the fact that there may be a decline in applications, right? What does that mean? What does a decline in applications mean for a place like CC? We've enjoyed a much bigger applicant pool than we would ever need. And yet there are some parts of our applicant pool where we're trying to meet particular goals. And when you really get down to it, there may not be as many people as we might like. So there's always room to grow in an applicant pool, not just for the sake of being able to say, woo, look at us, another record, but really to be able to have the depth and the interest among the students. So, I think this was this was I think any institution making this decision needs to consider all of the factors, right? All of the ways in which stakeholders need to feel comfortable. And, we have, in the case of CC, this news is not very old, but we've already started conversations about, so what will we need? What kind of support and resources will we need? And then, we're layering on top of this Supreme Court decision that's coming out in the next couple of months. And how will that have impacted all of us? So, beginning to tease apart some potential impacts and understand what we need to sort of make sure we're doing what we need to be doing and that we have all that we need to get there. So, again, I think it's really important to say no one, Secretary Cardona's quote was really interesting to me because I don't think anyone is worshiping at that altar.
Sure.
I don't know Secretary Cardona. This is not a dig on the secretary, but it's more that I think that many of us have sort of lived alongside U.S. News and World Report, but that we're not selling magazines on the corner, right? We are not really, they're not our idols, right? They're not the people that we look to for ethical compass, right? We have understood that they occupy a place, and I think we're all beginning to question how important is that place. And as an institution, do you want to take a stand on how important it is not in the work that you do and in the work that you do, particularly in spaces that matter to you as an institution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be fair to say, I really don't know anyone I've ever talked to that would say that the rankings really line up exactly with sort of their institutional values. And that's not just a dig at U.S. News. Yeah, U.S. News does happen to put a little more emphasis on selectivity, wealth, and prestige than something like a Washington Monthly. But no one rankings out there is ever going to sort of line up with your own institutional values. There's always going to be a bit of a mismatch, right? Because how could they possibly get it right? So in some ways, this feels to me not only a conversation about U.S. News, but sort of rankings in general. But I understand the primacy that they've played historically, more so than others. It's changing a little, but I get sort of the unique role that they play. Now, here's a question for you, a comment and a question. So the subject of rankings came up a lot on this recent trip I had to the Pacific Northwest, and whether schools are going to follow you guys. It came up in two of the different 7 schools I visited. And one school, I'm not going to name who they are, but they said, we're talking about it. They said, for one, we wouldn't mind being mentioned with CC and sort of getting some of that marketing buzz that comes with that. But they said, but we would hope that others would follow us. And what if we're just all out there on the boat by ourselves and nobody else follows? That was one point they made. And then another point they made was there's a pretty widespread perception. I know the folks at Reed feel this way and others feel it as well, that Reed got dinged for their move in 1996. And there's been some researchers that have studied that. And so this person said, that's a factor for us. Like, will there be retribution? Like, will a message be sent to us that, here's what you get? And is that ever anything that is in the back of people's minds as one of the factors when you're looking at a decision like this? Like, well, can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that a vigorous debate about those topics certainly makes a lot of sense, right? That there is a way in which you have to think about that, right? You really have to think about what is the impact going to be on your institution. And if
Sure.
visibility is important to every institution, you have to look at what happened at Reed, right? Now, Reed is 20 years later in a much better position than they were. But I do think it's really important that institutions think about, how will you weather this? Because that was exactly the conversation here. How great would it be if 10 other people announced a couple weeks later that they're doing the same thing? But
Right.
you have to then make your own decision, I guess, right?
Sure.
But of course, you're thinking about, will there be a penalty?
Mm-hmm.
How will people feel? And even if people, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is we've gotten a lot of like, bravo, good for you emails.
Sure.
Does that also mean that people will be equally excited about applying to CC, equally
Mhm.
excited about supporting CC if, we did a little back of the envelope calculations. My boss, our VP for enrollment, Mark
Sure.
Hatch, he's a data guy.
Yep.
And his back of the envelope calculation is that we could be in the 60s if we don't submit if U.S. News and Report continues to use the same formula that they've used for institutions that don't submit data. So if you are someone who says, I want to go to a college in the top 30, you probably won't find CC there this time next year. And what does that mean for us? And if the top 30 decided all to sort of exit together, there would be less of an impact on each individual institution, right?
Sure.
And more. So, I mean, I think that's you've got to think about that, right? And I think it just depends on where you put that focus, right? So I think my understanding, I was not with the Board of Trustees when they made this decision. I don't report directly to the president, but our understanding of what happened was all those things were laid out on the table. And you do a risk-benefit analysis. I will say that President Richardson wanted to do this when she was dean of the law school at UC Irvine. And so I think there was this natural inclination toward, I can see this also being very important for what's happening at CC and for the values and priorities we have as an institution.
And it feels like there's momentum. Like, I realize that law and medicine are different, but there is some, you could see the potential for that wave to carry over to undergrads, at least on some level. Now, I'll say this because I really feel comfortable. He'd be comfortable with me saying this. I interviewed Million True Love on this topic when he was on the podcast, but I also got to talk to him as well on my trip a couple of weeks ago. And one of the points he made is that law and medicine is very different from undergraduate. And he is not of the belief that lots and lots of schools will do this. And I mean, he stands behind their decision, but he said it's sometimes a lonely place to be. There are some consequences that come with it. Now, on the other hand, it's got to be freeing in a certain way. Can you talk a little bit about how not sort of feeling like you have to be really, really hyper conscious of some of the certain ways in which their metrics are used, and now there's a freedom that we can do what we feel we should do all along? Can you comment on that? Like, to me, that would be one of the best things.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to think about it. I think we've been mired in the details, to be honest with you, since it's just a few weeks old.
Sure.
It's a really interesting way to think about it. One of the narratives that I think I want to clarify, though, is I don't think that many of us tried to figure out how to manipulate our numbers so that U.S. News would give us the favorable ranking, right? So when we talk about our being between 25 and 29, by many metrics, 25 to 29 is not very many spaces, and that because our applications, our quality has increased, our numbers have increased, all of the metrics would suggest it's more than 4 spaces for us, right? And now there's ties, and they didn't sort of count institutions that tied on scores the way they did early on.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would say is 25 to 29 is not much of a jump, and you could just, if you really wanted to manipulate the numbers, we could probably get it down to 15, but that was never our goal, even when we submitted data. Like, our goal was to meet institutional priorities, and our goal was to try to do this in the best way that we could. And so it's lonely because I love that comment is sort of lonely, because you sort of feel like you're sort of stepping out on the edge of the cliff, hoping that you don't get punished too much, right? But that you never really worshipped at the sort of, how do I manipulate the numbers to make U.S. News and World Report feel okay? I've worked at I've worked at 5 institutions, right? And I would say there's been differing levels of attention to that day in September. And I don't even know that your listeners know this, but you get an embargoed list about 48 to 72 hours before, but it's embargoed. You're not supposed to share it. Some institutions I've worked at, like, within hours of that embargoed list, there would be an analysis of why X institution went from this number to this number, and why CC was now 27 instead of 29, right? I would say there's a little bit more of a relaxed feeling just about this whole subject at CC. And so I think for us, certainly there's a little bit of relief in not having to think about what those various percentages are. Is it this percent for grades? Is it this percent for alumni giving, right? But I think for us, it's also, I mean, kind of business as usual. I mean, one of the things that was interesting for us about the timing is it was time to do it. Our board was here. They made the decision. There was, lots of surveying of staff and faculty and parents and current students. But it's like, we're in the middle of admission committee, folks. I'm just going to put my head down and finish this class, right? So for us, it was one of those moments of like, we know what our day-to-day reality is. We know what needs to happen. And I don't think there's been as much attention here as some other places I've worked, but also because I think there has been a gradual diminishing of why, like even in places. So if you think about like US News and Report occupies a bigger space the further you are away from the institution geographically and the less you know about it. So I've never been to Colorado. I've never heard of this Colorado college thing. I'm going to see how they're ranked, right? But even that would then quickly turn to, is that really how you're supposed to research a school? Is that the advice, Mark, you would give to, someone about the best way to see whether Colorado College is a good fit for you? So, even in spaces where I've been, when I've recruited internationally, right, where sometimes U.S. News and World Report is even perceived in some markets as a government analysis, right? Not a private magazine selling their, most popular issue of the year. Even then we sort of say, whoa, okay, so maybe this gives us a little bit of credibility in this space, but you gotta go deeper. So I do appreciate that even those who are still in the rankings are approaching it with a little bit of skepticism and trying to use this as a counseling moment to how do you build a list?
I mean, I think you brought up a really important point when you said at your 5 institutions, it's been handled differently, because I think you'll see the full range out there. I mean, there are, I've interviewed a few presidents on here, and they've been very candid about the pressure they felt from trustees to see rankings move in a certain direction. Miljan, when he was on here, he talked about how he knows searches where people have gone in and they've presented, I've moved the rankings at, where I've been from this to that and this to that. And that's been what certain places have wanted to hear, and it's gotten people certain jobs. So there certainly are places that are, Northeastern was very public about it, how they studied the model and made adjustments accordingly. All right. And so back in the late 90s or in the early part of the century. So I think that there's different levels of how much attention is brought to that and how much people change their whole approach, whether it's tinkering on the edges or just completely doing their own thing, or literally basing what they do around it and letting the tail, what's that term?
The tail well the dog.
Yes.
You got it. Yes, that's the one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, this goes back to, you've got to know your own institution. You've got to know where you want to be, what's important to you, how you want to position yourself. What are your enrollment challenges, right? I think Scott's piece in Inside Higher Ed talked about, mentioned that one institution that feels like, wow, even a regional, like, we're the best in this particular region of the country, or we're top 10 for X, Y, or Z, we're top 10 for happy students, right? That is, we all love endorsements. We all love that idea of someone is giving us validation. Someone is saying what you're doing in this particular space. As human beings, we love it. As institutions, it's really, there's a utility to it. There's a way in which when a student comes up to talk with you at a college fair and you only have 30 seconds, and this is like, I've never heard of this school in this town in some random state. How you make the case. I don't think any of us say, well, we're number whatever, but, we're renowned for teaching, or we're nationally ranked for, students who go on to have careers in in the nonprofit world, or whatever it might be, right? So, I think we are having conversations internally about where will our external validation come? We never thought it was where U.S. News and World Report would put us, but at the same time, you've got to say, like, if someone doesn't know us, where will we point? Are we just out of the participating in rankings altogether?
Well, that was a question I had. Is this does this apply to all rankings or just US News?
It's a great question that I think we are still digging into, right? I think that we know that US News and World Report, in the way that the numbers are used in a particular way, doesn't really help us. We have declined to participate in some of those other surveys that are like, we're going to come on your campus and interview 100 students standing in the quad today, right? Some of those are more sensationalistic or, we're going to figure out the least exciting parts of your campus and we're going to expose them to the public, like a little bit more of a gotcha sort of. So we haven't really participated as actively in those as some others, but it's such a good question, right? Because I think there are rankings that are more, how should we say it, that give you more substance or might be aligned with the things that matter to us. We know that the way that U.S. News and World Reports collects and reports data is not aligned with who we are, but it's one of the questions that we have as we move forward. It's one of the questions that is being unpacked on campus, to be honest with you, as I record this, right? In that this is very new, and we're all trying to figure out what this particular space is. And we report data to U.S. News and World Report in May, so it was important to make this decision. But I think we're going to need to have some really, really good conversations and good back and forth with a number of people around what this means. So,
is there a space for, I know one of the things that Yale said, and others as well, when it came to the law school is we are for transparency. And this is not our attempt to hide numbers. In fact, we are going to be making a lot of the things public ourselves directly to you about our data and not rely on U.S. News as an emissary for that. Is there a role for that, or is that just really hard to do because, you're sitting over here with your faint voice versus their big blowhorn that, that reaches whatever, right? They claim 29 million original searches a year on their website. Or does that feel like, that's something that we can do? Or does that really feel like it's really insignificant?
No, I think it's really important. And I think this conversation around whether you submit data really is, if we could have a conversation, a number of us in this field could have a conversation about what really matters. I'd love to, Mark, maybe this is your challenge. How about another job for you? That you develop.
No, thank you.
You
have enough, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. You got enough going on. But that someone develops a rubric that says, here are the things that are important, and here are the 10 things that you need to know about a prospective institution. College scorecard has been one of those places.
Sure.
Or there are some things that are in other spaces. Some of them are, the federal government or the iPads, the way that data are collected for federal purposes, right? So this, I think, is not a question of trying to hide. It's trying to say, in fact, here are our data. We'd like you to understand them on our terms, right? And not assign percentages to like we get a value rating based on what percentage of our students are taking out loans. I don't know, like, what does that mean? Is higher better,
right.
Lower better? Is in the middle better, right? Maybe rank doesn't matter, but there are in fact so few high schools that even rank these days. We're getting to the majority of the students who apply to Colorado College, and most institutions don't have a class rank. Do grades matter? Grades still matter a lot, right? That is the best way, regardless of what institution it is, to predict success, right? So many other things, right? So I guess part of our wish to be part of a national dialogue is not just so that we're not lonely, or that we're not the only, but that we can really entertain a deep conversation about what does matter, right? What matters to your students when you're talking to them about building their lists? What matters to us as an institution around how our behavior in the enrollment division aligns with our institutional priorities, aligns with, we care very much about our ADEI work, right? Are we there? No. Do we want this to be a way for others to keep us accountable and keep ourselves accountable for that work? Absolutely, right? It underlines, of all the priorities, this is a pretty big one. Access is a pretty big one. Inclusion is a pretty big one. But how do we live that reality day to day, given all of the challenges that institutions have? That we have net tuition revenue goals. We have goals around all of the priorities of particular enrolling students and what classes look like. So, I hope this is more transparency. It might be transparency that institutions are directing and guiding, because we're saying, okay, hey, we think this is the way that Colorado College or any college should be evaluated. So if you still think there's some value in rankings, just make sure you might start there, but please don't end there, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting. I think that I certainly think there'll be someone that will be attracted to your decision from a leadership standpoint and for sort of leading with your values. I certainly do. But I want to come back again to the benefits. Like, what are the benefits to not doing it? Is the benefit that you don't feel a pressure you've already said you weren't caving to that pressure. It wasn't a huge emphasis, but it certainly has to be nice not to have to report things, like you gave an example of one right there, like your percentage of loan debt. Well, just enroll completely wealthy people and you won't even have to worry about loans at all, right? So there's a perverse incentive that goes against some of your compositional diversity goals. But is the benefit that you don't feel the pressure to have to align with metrics that U.S. News uses that are different from your own? Is the benefit that sort of you feel, I don't want to use the word pure because that's not a good word, but you sort of feel like you're standing by your principles, and standing by your principles just feels like the morally and ethical thing to do, or is it the fact that you have sort of, like I said before, a freedom to not be tethered to this other metric in a way that maybe it didn't control you, but you're always conscious of. You didn't want to veer off from it too much before. Like, there has to be. I'm not hearing you say kind of what the benefit is per se.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's because for me, I've been part of this system for a long time, so I think you need a little space to understand just where it goes. I will say, I think the person who has championed this very loudly and clearly is who I'm going to echo today, which is our president, right? Who really believes that if we're going to be mission focused, if we're going to do the things that we say we're going to do, we need the world to know who we are, and we need to be accountable to these things, right? We need to sort of stake our claim that this is sort of who we are, right? And that there is potentially some relief in not having to worry about the impact that will have. But I think it's sort of some sense of a mix of confidence and humility, right? That the confidence is that we feel like we can stand on our own. We can be the institution that we're aspiring to be. And if we're not there, because we know there will be some people that have said to us, so we're going to call you out here because you may not be that, accessible, inclusive institution that you say you are, but that's where we want to be. That's where we're going to aim our resources and our vision, right? At the same time, I think we need to be humble to say, like, maybe it's back to marketing, or maybe it's back to this is a crowded landscape, and we want students to put Colorado College on their list. We want students who are going to continue to come and thrive and be transformed by this education. All of us want that in every admission office, right? But I think there is perhaps some sense of we get to do it on our own terms, or we're trying to shake up something that people are afraid. It's like a little bit like if you're standing at the edge of the cliff, you're sort of saying, like, I'm ready to kind of go over. I'm ready to sort of shake this up a little bit, right? I think that when our president gives public speeches and in emails and communications internally, actually, she uses bold and brave a lot. And, sometimes it becomes a bit of a meme, or like, oh, it's another bold and brave decision, right? Just because we all have our ways of putting things into words. But I think she really means it, right?
It comes through in her writings very strongly.
Yeah.
And I think that it gives you guys an opportunity to accentuate something that I remember you saying in your interview with me 7-8 months ago, which is you've always been part of mission-driven institutions. And that was one thing that drew you to CC. And I think it gives you an opportunity to explicate that in a way that's like take kind of a big highlighter and just highlights it when you're communicating this with families. Like, basically what the president's trying to do, right? Like, this is who we are. This is what we believe. And, I can understand how there's a little tension there too, though, because you don't want to do it in a way where you feel like you're disparaging U.S. News too much, because there might be retribution. but still, I think there's an opportunity to say, this is just who we are, and this was not consistent with who we are, and we're committed to who we are. And I think there's a parent and there's a student that if you sort of say it loudly, say it proudly, I think they could get really excited. I'm not saying, they're probably already somewhat excited. They wouldn't be having a conversation with you. But I think there's potential for it adding to the enthusiasm that they would feel for you. And I think there's potential to break away from the pack and just say, this is, without putting anybody down, say, this is just who we are. And we're committed to who we are, and not letting any outside influences bend us or force us or shape us to be something other than we are. I know for me as a parent, that would be a very appealing message if I liked the reasons that were being given. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. And I think it is, I think it very much is maybe the wanting others to be with us is that we're
Sure.
all redefining what it
Yeah.
means to be who we are. And that
Sure.
we know that families and counselors and students are saying, wait, who are you? Like, we talk a lot about, we want someone to leave a presentation, whether it's virtual or in person, and be affected. If you're like, Colorado College, like, you might be Colorado College, that block plan sounds way too intimidating for me. Or Colorado College, that block plan sounds just what I've been waiting for, right? So to have
Right.
this reaction, and to have a reaction that says, here is who we are. And, I don't want to be so cocky to say, take us or leave us, right? But I
Sure.
do think that institutions are afraid to say, that's why we have 80,000 inquiries at the top of our funnel. We're afraid to say, this is who we are.
Yeah.
Come find us if this makes sense to you. We always hope we can get those that are a little skeptical to convert a little
Sure.
bit. But I think that's our hope, is like, don't just follow the ways that we've had since 1983 to define ourselves. Let's redefine what matters, and let's be willing to be a little bit, I don't know, like out there about, or courageous about how we talk about ourselves, and not to be afraid.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to say it loudly, say it proudly, and embrace it. And I think that there's even an aspect of, if you're owning it with pride, it really reinforces, wow, they really are committed to their mission. Like, look at what they've done. And so it'll just be interesting. I know this is something that I'm sure you'll have a different perspective 3 years from now, right? Or even
Sure.
1 year from now, but certainly 3 to 5 years from now, you'll be able to look back, and at the rate at which higher ed's changing, I mean, who knows where we'll be with the landscape. I mean, look at how many changes have occurred in just the last, couple years. And so I can't even imagine where we'll be, but I think it's great. I still will be surprised if more people don't follow suit. It may not be this year, because submissions are due pretty soon.
That's right.
But by next year, I will be surprised, because these conversations are happening. It reminds me of test optional.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that. It really is, because it was sort of like a couple of us, the early adopters were looking at what was happening at, say, like a place like Bates that had been
Sure.
a super early adopter of test optional,
Yes.
and being a little wary and assembling your committee. I think that one of the things I will say, 33 years at institutions, that surprised me was it moved pretty fast here. And I don't mean like it moved in days. It was months.
Sure.
It might have been as much as a year, but sometimes institutions can be awfully slow. Like, there needs to be a committee, and this committee needs to write a report, and this committee needs to read the report, and 3 years later, right? And so I do think that our guess, without knowing, because no one really wants to share that, is that conversations are going on, but that taking the time to think about what is the way that your institution makes decisions, and who are who is part of these decisions, and where are their sort of influences. There's no faculty that says, oh, I'm really excited about my students because we're number 10 in the country, right? My students are so much better than when we were number 15 in the country. And yet I do think in the test optional movement, for instance, having worked at, not at CC, but another institution that went test optional during my time, there were some professors that just sort of felt like, is that a proxy for quality? Is that a proxy for, there's so much variety in terms of how students are educated, and do test scores give us some confidence about the academic ability of the students who are in front of us, right? And, disentangling some of that takes some time. And I suspect that disentangling process, and that, people raising concerns or objections, right? I hope our application numbers don't go down, but not because I think like it'll be a feather in my cap if the numbers don't go down, but because I hope people hear this in the way that we intended, that it is alignment with priorities. It is mission driven. It is the place that we want to be and aspire to become. But if applications go down, I also have to say, like, we have decided we have decided we're ready to be really proud of talking about what makes us who we are, what's in our DNA, what's important to us in 2023, and what will be important to us after we both retire, right? In 2043, that it'll still be an institution that cares about those things, right? So,
and it's so new. I'm sure as communicators, you'll all get better at communicating it too. As you have more, you're going to get asked it a lot at fairs and info sessions, and you know what I mean.
Right.
And like all of us, we all get better at communicating as we have more practice. And it's literally so fresh that I'm sure you haven't even really worked out how you'll communicate it on the road and everything. So, but this has been really, really great. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about such a hot issue. And I'm really excited about this partnership with you guys for the next couple of years. And so friends, we're going to have different members of the CC team come on over the course of the 4 times a year. They'll be on every 3 months, and we've got some great things we're looking at talking about. Many of our listeners may know, maybe some don't know, you guys are leaders when it comes to gap research, and so we certainly want to talk about that. And then we're hoping to have Mark and Susan, who go all the way back to Bates together in the 80s.
Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. So we're hoping to have them come on and sort of talk about what's changed in college admissions from the 80s to here we are here 2023. And just you've just got a really great team. Matt, what's Matt's title exactly?
So Matt is director of admission. Yeah.
And Matt's an alum, and he's been at CC for good 25 years or so.
He came and never left is how we
he came and never left. And so he's one of your ones that hasn't been on here yet. We're going to get Matt on. I've always enjoyed my conversations with him. And of course, Hillary we had on recently. So we've got a real good team, and we're excited about this. And, I might ask our listeners sometime to send their questions in for you guys and do one of those and send you the questions that listeners have. Like, before I let you go, anything you're seeing out there in terms of trends, anything at all you're observing?
It's interesting because, I think we have been a little bit head down over the last 3 months. And I think we're now all lifting up our heads now that many of us have released our final round of decisions this week or will release this week. I think we're all thinking a lot about what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. And what's interesting about this is I do wonder sometimes if it's so monumental for us. And I do sometimes wonder what students and families are thinking about this, right? I think we're already, thinking and planning what would it look like. In fact, I had a meeting this morning with faculty from 2 different divisions at CC that are interested in doing research on how we do this process, what race neutral might look like, what is it that we're trying to achieve, right? So I think there's some really interesting things coming along. I guess it was that 51 application person that probably was the one that stuck with me all winter from the point of view of, like, how do we help students keep the number more reasonable? I guess the other thing, because I think I may have said to you in an email that you have a big fan at a Northeast independent school. We'll leave it at that. And I was talking to their parents in January on a virtual Sunday evening session, and just how much students, maybe it's after COVID, maybe it's Gen Z, but helping students to really navigate this process and do the things that we would sort of take for granted, that sometimes getting documents in, making sure things are happening, that kind of level of how we interact with others. It also aligns with mental health issues that we're seeing and how we understand those, both as students are coming and what we think about once once students are on campus and how we support them. So do
you see how COVID has impacted students?
Yeah, I think so. I think where we're seeing it is students who figured out how to be alone a lot. And for some, that was very freeing.
Right.
And for others, that the deprivation was significant, and that it has disproportionate effects. Some students that just sailed through, and others who really struggled because of any number of factors, right? Their family, the family's health, family's financial well-being, what jobs parents had, what opportunities students had, right? So I think that we still see some of those, and just every year it feels a little different. Like the 12th graders lost, I don't want to minimize what the 12th graders lost in the first year. They sort of lost prom and graduation, which are important. Don't want to devalue them. But we're seeing students, when it happened in ninth grade, they lost all of the important stuff that happens in ninth grade, which is developmental, it's emotional, it's cognitive. There are so many things. And now I'm starting to think about our next group will have, the start of COVID will have been eighth grade, right?
So how does that show up, Karen? Like, what does that look like? Does that look like, boy, their writing's not as good, their math's not as good, they want to be by themselves and they don't want to do group activities? Like, what does that look like either in admissions or on a college campus?
I think all of the above. I think it depends on the person. But I think, for instance, we're hearing that our students who are in doubles and triples aren't as good at being roommates as they used to be, right? Some of that is that isolation. Some of it is the I'm not sort of coming out for things, or I'm not sort of paying as much attention, or that I did miss something academically, that I missed this element of math, which then, I sort of never catch up with when I sort of got to the end. I think the mental health piece, this is collective trauma, right? If we think about it, we all were affected in one extent or another, but where you were in your own life's journey and who you had around you made a huge difference in that way. So I think we see students who are more anxious, who are more depressed, or who don't quite know how to reach out for help, or don't know how to reach out to others for help, or feel more isolated in their particular journey. So, part of it is I think we put everybody together and they talked about it. They'd realized there's a lot of commonality, right? But I think one of the places that I saw it was, we sat with our gap year students, Matt and I sat with our gap year students at the very beginning of the orientation process. And we were just struck by how a year off the track made them even more wise and emotionally mature and ready to dig in and ready to be adventurous and not so worried about where's my friend group going to be, what's it going to be like academically. And many of them, because they did it sort of the tail end of COVID, had to encounter a lot of challenges. Like, I thought my gap year would be X, and it turned out to be I couldn't get a visa, or the planes weren't going, or it wasn't quite exactly what I thought it was going to be, or I got there and I had to kind of regroup. So that resilience piece, I think, feels like it's missing in some ways. And then when we see a group of students who are more resilient, who are able to be better at contextualizing what's happening to them, they feel more, I don't know, you sense in them those qualities. They're more pronounced, I guess, is what I would say.
Last question for you, because I could talk to you all day.
I know, me
very
too.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've had quite a few podcasts on just how boys aren't going to college at the same rate, and they're especially with more under-resourced families, like maybe they're going to get a job to help mom out, or now they can get a job as a DoorDash delivery or an Amazon worker at 22 an hour. That's more than their father made. And so they're making those decisions. Do you see this in the applicant pool? Do you see the trend toward that's been happening for a while? The young ladies going off to college and the guys not as much so?
Yeah, I think, and particularly, in my space, it's been liberal arts colleges, which I think have
Sure.
been a bit of a difficult thing for, those who identify as women and those who identify as men. But I think the other thing
No
is,
engineering and stuff like
yeah,
that.
right. We joke about we could work a little bit on our gender balance if we had engineering and football. And that
Sure.
really is just a joke, but it's sort
Sure.
of like every joke. There's a kernel of truth in it.
Yeah, pretty big kernel.
Right?
Pretty big kernel. Because look at all the engineering schools. They're like 75-25.
Right. And so I think we think about that. But I also think about, if you were to think about those COVID disruptions by gender, one of the things at one point in my life, I was volunteering at a homeless shelter. And as you learn about sort of what it's like to not have a home permanently, you learn that women are underrepresented at many shelters and men are overrepresented because women more naturally know how to ask for help. Now, that might be a stereotype, but it seems to be one of the reasons why sometimes the balance is off a little bit. Or, in cases of, couples, when the wife dies, often if it's a heterosexual couple, the man fares worse than if the man dies first and the woman is the one that lives, right? So that there's something about that asking for help or reaching out or seeing the value in connection that I just keep thinking about, right, when it comes to that. And
so it's another way in which COVID is impacted.
Could be.
COVID impacting them potentially.
Could be. And also because I think we give messages that sound that resonate to students that are already, we talk a lot about like how you would, young women in high school tend to be very dutiful and conscientious, like that good girl image, right?
Sure.
And
please
so,
the teacher.
Please the teacher, do everything right. Even if they're perhaps, sometimes I'll read an application where I feel like maybe this male identifying student isn't quite as dutiful and pleasing, but has a lot going on intellectually, right? And so I think we need to tease apart some of those factors. That's part of what we talk about. We talk about holistic admission, right? Is who is this human in front of you, right? And it's easy to get attracted to the dutiful, pleasing everyone, knows how to get an A in a class versus the student that's sort of fighting a little bit with that idea, right? But
is that part of your training around in file reading, like looking for sort of how gender biases can cause you sometimes to maybe miss a diamond in the rough because of, that kind of thing? Is that part of the training that you guys go through?
Yeah. And I think also in places where like a CC, where we want more men, right? Where we would like, we're not way off on, gender balance, but we are a co-ed school and we'd like to be closer to half and half. That's not where the national statistics are skewing. But, I think so I think there are ways in which we know that is one of our important goals. It's a little bit like, it's the same thing with compositional diversity. You've got to try to figure out what the context of this individual person is, right? That you understand something about who they are as a member of their family, as a member of their community. I also think the other thing that comes into this is we do this lens exercise at the beginning of training where we say, what are your lenses? You like yourself, like you like when you see yourself reflected in the application or your kids or your best friend or someone else, right? And we got to say don't be, I often own the lens of I was kind of that dutiful, conscientious people pleaser in high school. And I love those kind of students. I'm like, you did everything you were supposed to. Your documents are in on time. You followed all the directions.
We really look for people like ourselves in this business, don't we? We really do.
And I have to say, you know what? I need to start finding the value in the messy people. So that's been my goal in my work, to have people check me. That's why we do this team-based reading, where someone else is like, oh, yeah, she might be dutiful, but wow, it doesn't really go beyond the sort of people pleasing, or there's got to be more substance to it than that. Or this is
that's hard because I remember doing boarding school admissions, and I remember it taking me years to come to grips with some of my own biases. And I used to be pretty harsh on someone that did an interview well. And I had to get called on that by some of my colleagues, and face that and recognize that I was harshly grading great kids that just maybe they didn't, light the room up.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I have banned the word flat to describe human beings. And if people know it, they'll be like, oh, sorry, Karen, I used that word flat. I was like, no human being is flat. You may find their story uninteresting. You may find some of what they do routine. No human being is flat. Like that is a word that we need to banish. I think we need to banish from vocabularies when we're talking about humans. So
we are already more advanced than me because we say dull as dishwater, which is worse.
Right? I could come up with a one-trick pony. We had all of these. Yes, duller than a box of rocks, or dumber than a box of rocks. Yeah, but I think it really is. It is hard because they're humans, we're humans, right? We're just trying to figure this out. So do the best we can.
Karen, this has been great. I thank you so much. And thanks for partnering with CC in this. And go back to whatever you're doing these days, file reading or shaping your class. Or
always something.
Yeah, always something.
This was the best part of the day, though. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks a bunch.
Take care.
All right, take care. Yep. Be well.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, last week, Lisa and I kicked off a new 4-part series on which groups feel the most disillusioned with the college admissions process. We started with alumni kids, and we transitioned to high test takers. We'll pick up and continue discussing the point about high test takers now, and then also discuss a third group that often feels disillusioned with their college options. Or they divert too many resources to schools with low probabilities, which I see all the time. All the resources get diverted to the low probability options.
Yeah. No, and it's hard. I think it's almost like instead of just looking at test scores is like this, do I have it? Yes or no? It's the test scores, grades, rigor, extracurriculars, and maybe some kind of hook. Like if you have all 5 of those, then maybe, getting into, dream school is a realistic possibility for you. But if you don't, then, you've got to think it's going to be a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the most selective schools, it's rare for any kid to get in without a hook.
Right.
Like that, you just have to. Now, you don't always have to have the most impactful hooks, right? Like developmentally recruited athlete, I would say, are the 2 most impactful hooks. Even more than faculty kid. I'm seeing some really strong faculty kids at some schools not get in. But, it depends on the school, too. Some of the big state systems don't even favor faculty kids, but most of the privates do. Faculty's a pretty big hook. But most of the time, like really large aid, really, really large donation from somebody who's in range, you're in. Good enough to play the sport, coaches want you. In range academically, you're in. So, yeah, you may not have one of those like super powerful hook. It might be something like, your classics major, and we're thinking of phasing that department out or laying faculty off. It could be something like that. But when I go back and look at all the kids, I was like, it's extremely rare that someone doesn't have some hook. Like if somebody gets in one of these places without some hook, it's extraordinary. It's like a conversation.
Right.
Like I can count those kids in one hand over the last years. Yeah. I'm talking about the most competitive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They just have so many kids that are so strong that they're looking and saying, what do we not have in our student body that we need more of? And that's usually where the resources go. So I think we've beat this one up enough. The only thing that I would say, and I almost made this a 5th one, but it's so similar to this that I didn't, but I'm going to mention it in the same one. Probably should be its own category. Anyway, here it is. People for whom think that the way you keep score is just off the academic metrics. So in other words, like this is more than just GPA. This is more than test scores. It's test scores, GPA, rank, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you how many times people say to me, I cannot believe this kid got in at this school. Like basically, normally it's in the context of like I had higher test scores and I'm ranked higher, or my grades are higher. For one, people really think they know every single thing that's in another person's file, which they don't. And they think they know the needs of an institution, which they don't.
They can't, yeah.
But if you buy into the fact that that's how value is completely conferred, just off of who looks the best, who has the best numbers, you're going to be disillusioned. So I mostly see it with testing, but I see it with all of the academic metrics. I see it with rank. I see it with GPA. If the valedictorian doesn't get in, but the kid who's 6th in the class gets in, then people feel like, how did that happen? How could that have happened? Which shows that they think that schools are like looking at it purely from a numbers standpoint. Does that make sense? That's
absolutely. Yeah. You have to, like I was saying, you can't just have one thing or even 2 or 3 things. You got to have all 5 things. 5 variables have to be strong to even have a shot at some of these places. And even then it might come down to who else applied that year and what their needs were and a little bit of luck.
well, yeah, and I would say more than 5 because you're starting right away. You have to have the rigor. You're dead without the rigor, right? You have to have the grades. You have to have the grade trends. If you submit scores, you have to have the scores. The writing has to be strong. All the recommendations, counselor, teacher, if there's another, that has to be good. Extracurriculars, increasingly for more and more schools, demonstrated interest. Personal qualities, and then institutional priorities. So it's more than 5.
Yeah, that's 10. That's on 5 and then 5 more.
And then if there's an interview or a portfolio or an audition, then those need to be good. So, but you know what, Lisa, I feel like we might be discouraging somebody with this, and I do not want to do that. It's actually the opposite. I feel I'm trying to actually encourage people because I feel like if people can understand this, several things will happen. One, there'll be like a student I'm thinking of right now where they were in that alumni bucket and they didn't get in. And they were like, we kind of didn't expect to, but we gave it a shot. Like they put it in perspective, somebody that we both know. So that's one. Secondly, it will cause people to look at other schools they should be looking at.
Right.
Yeah, and come to realize how good those are.
Right.
That's the only reason we're doing this. I'm not trying to discourage anybody. I'm trying to there are so many diamonds in the rough out there that you can miss because your list is top heavy and you don't even know it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So, we just want everyone to have places to go that they love. And there are definitely, places out there for kids and, just to put more energy into finding those places and getting interested and learning about them than just hoping that, it works out at Stanford. And that's it's Stanford or die, because it might be die on that one, chances are not in your
it normally
favor.
is, honestly. Yeah. Look, we have kids at all of those places, every single one of them. They're all hooked. Like I can think of one kid, that got into Brown RD unhooked. He was just extraordinary. Like a kid, one kid you meet very rare. You don't meet very many kids like that in your career, but it's really pretty rare. And I honestly can't say that student was unhooked because I don't know what Brown was looking for. Students are accepted for a reason. Decisions are never random. What I should say, to be more accurate, is I can only think of one kid in the last few years I've worked with that's gotten into one of the 10 hardest schools in the country to get in where I didn't know what their hook was. And that's completely different from me saying there wasn't any hook. I realize I'm using hook in a very broad use of the word, but students are admitted because they meet some need of the school beyond a sterling academic record. So let's go to the third one.
Okay.
Private school. Private school is a big source of expectations, and it's understandable because one, you put a lot of money. Like remember back when we were talking about alumni, you said I would probably be upset if I'd given Chicago or Northwestern a lot of money. Well, you've put a lot of money into paying for this private school.
Yes.
And for most people, part of the expectation is that that's going to result in different college options that they would have had they not done that. And I hear this all the time. I was talking with a family from the Mid-Atlantic recently, and this is a younger parent. In fact, it's a 9th grade parent. And they'd spent a lot of money on private school so far. And they wanted to know, I want to know, I did not do all this to have my kid go to generic U.
Right.
I had to have a really hard conversation with them because the transcript wasn't good.
Mm-hmm.
And I could literally talk on this topic for hours, but I'll just quickly share 2 situations where this came up. One was the college fair that Susan and I founded back in 2003. Our first inaugural one was in 2005. Cliff Thornton was our keynote speaker, at Wesleyan for 30 years. And somebody from Germantown Friends, which is a powerhouse school. Some people might disagree with me, but I would say it's the most academic school in Pennsylvania, the most academic private school in Pennsylvania. And I think that would be the vote if people had to vote on that. It's not some wild out there opinion. So Germantown Friends parent stood up and said, are you going to take into consideration the fact that my child is at Germantown Friends? When I could have gone around the school around the corner and been 4.0. And then Cliff, he's a straight shooter. And he just said, to whom much is given, much is required. He's like, you're also at a place where you have great college counseling and you have small classes and your teachers know how to write great recommendations and it's easier for your kid to have a lead role and become captain of a team because it's small. He went on and on. And so that was answer number 1. That was 2005. Fast forward to 2019. Greg Roberts, who we've had on the podcast before, he's over UVA's admissions office. He's speaking at an event that happens every year in Atlanta at Westminster, Westminster would be the Germantown Friends of Georgia. Some years they have over 40% national merit. Kind of commend it. So highest average test scores, highest all that stuff, wealthiest, all that stuff. So the Westminster parent stands up and asks the same question and said, my kid could have been 4.0 if they would have went to a different school. Are you going to take that into consideration? And Greg starts, he answers, first thing he says is, I'll answer the question, but you're not going to like my answer. Now he had a little bit more of a nuance than Cliff did. He said, I'm not saying we don't look at high school, but it doesn't count as much as you think. We're not just going to take your B plus and make it an A.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing, and this is so tricky to try to communicate this. I'll try my best. Schools, colleges, they don't have quotas per se. I'll see, 1 year they'll take a really large number of kids from one school. Next year, they'll hardly take any. It just depends on their needs and who's in that applicant pool. And a lot of times 2 or 3 different kids could meet 2 or 3 completely different needs for the school. Having said that, they want to have diversity of high schools.
Right.
I mean, I heard Lee Coffin say the other day, I don't want to quote him, but, a class of a little bit over 1,100 incoming had almost 1,000 different high schools in it,
Yeah.
So they want that diversity. So what does that mean? There is an aspect at stronger schools where you kind of are cannibalizing each other. They're really, it's weird to say that because it's not like they have a quota, but at the same time, when they're seeing lots and lots of strong kids from the same place, they're only going to take but so many from that place because it goes against their diversity of other high schools.
Mm-hmm. But this is a difference. I mean, it didn't used to be like that. And I think people's expectations are maybe what was true 5 or 10 years ago. I think that, there were pipelines then that were pretty established, but now the highly selectives have moved away from that.
Yeah, I would say it's been more than 5 or 10 years.
Okay. I have no
but I agree with you. Back in the day, I remember interviewing this parent, in boarding school admissions who went to Milton, where Julia's at, Milton Academy in Boston. And this parent's a CEO of a big, huge company. And she said, Mark, in my graduating class, 40 kids went to Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
Like back in the day, like the headmasters at the boarding schools had like handshake agreements.
Right.
That was quite a while ago, but it slowly eroded to the point where I was just having a conversation with a really seasoned person just yesterday, actually, about how few schools are doing counselor calls now. Now, a lot of schools aren't even doing the counselor calls. So it's changed a lot as the schools have diversified to reach the charter schools and the home schools and the public schools. They still have a higher percentage from those schools.
Right.
Percentage-wise, but that's partly because there's a lot of talent there. Truth be told, there's talent everywhere. There's also a lot of privilege. And there are a lot of well-resourced parents that have done what any parent would do that cares about education if they had resources. They would give their kid every advantage that their resources can give them from birth. And really, there's a lot of kids at those schools that meet the needs of the school, right? So if you think the development needs, there's more people that are development cases there. There's a lot of times you'll get recruited athletes there because part of the admission process of those schools oftentimes is to look for athletes or the orchestra or whatever. And then they have a higher percentage of high achievers because they screen for academics on the front end.
Right.
But this really breeds entitlement, and I get it. But one of the best things that I ever heard was from a family I worked with last year. And I was going over with the dad this whole thing about private schools. I see a lot of expectations, a lot of disillusionment. I don't want that to happen to you. It turned out okay for him. His kid got in his ED and he's in an IV and it worked out for him. But I was just trying to prepare him because there's no guarantees. And the dad said one of the most brilliant things I've ever heard. He said, I didn't send my kid here with an expectation that he would get in a better school. I sent him here so that when he got in, he would be able to excel.
Right. And that's like if you get a better education and you learn to be a better writer and you have better study habits. And I think that being in a private
rigor, and you're used to the rigor.
Right. Can foster that kind of success.
Definitely does. I mean, obviously, we can't just group all independent and private schools together, right? But like the strong, we're talking about strong academic selective ones. Because I would say, like, there are a lot of, especially religious-based private schools that sometimes are modestly selective. Maybe people pick them more for values-based reasons, where I don't see those expectations are the same. They went there because they thought that the values they were trying to teach in the home would be
right.
Yeah. But I'm talking about like the more academic, just like they're like the version of the college on the high school side. Like they were academically selective. They have high test scores. They have lots of rigor. Those are the times when I see the most disillusionment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's hard because, as somebody who went through the private school application process last year, all the places hand you the school profile. Like, look at all the great schools that our kids have gotten into over the last 5 years. And I think so, if you're not like cynical and jaded like me and just like, yeah, that's great, and crumple it up and throw it away. I mean, you're going to say, oh, my kid has a chance of getting into all these schools. And, that's very individual depending on your child, but they kind of still sell it like that. So I can't blame parents for believing it.
I absolutely glad you brought this up because this is the marketing that you do on that side. And I know because I did it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there's a summer, a lot of times what you do in admissions is like fall is travel season and winter is reading season and spring is yield season and summer is kind of miscellaneous season, but a lot of it is special projects. Like, yeah, that's when you do more vacation and stuff, but you do a lot of special projects. And so you could be everything like, okay, like we need to revise our tour guide program or we need to revise our landing page or admissions. So one year it was my project to revise how we presented our college list. And I came up with this idea because I'm going to sound like the big evil marketer over here, Lisa. I said, let's take all of the schools where our kids are admitted at and let's list everywhere where they're in the last 5 years. And let's put in bold any place that more than one kid has gone to. That was intentional on my part because I knew that some of the schools like Deerfield and Choate and Andover and Exeter, Lawrenceville and Hotchkiss, we couldn't compete with in terms of they might have like Harvard 17, Duke 13. We couldn't compete with that.
So you just
let's put bold.
Lies, like so many.
Yeah, because we had bold at all the names that anybody would ever want to see. So because when you're in admissions, that's a factor for people. They're looking at that, so you have a tendency to do that. And then when you're in college counseling, you don't like that because you're putting pressure on me.
Right.
You're creating a false impression. And what people don't see is what we talked about before, is that a lot of the same hooks that you use to recruit, the colleges use. Yeah. So some of those people got in because they were incredible athletes. Some of them got in because somebody gave a huge donation, and the same thing happens on the college side. Sometimes when it comes to students of color, you're partnering with the top programs in the country that identify the gifted and talented 1% and then put them to 2 to 3 years of training and send them your way. So then the colleges, so then they can outcompete for the kids that they're going up against in that category. And so Susan and I used to always talk about this, like, wow, people are so impressed with the college list, but like it's the kids with the hooks that are getting all these spots.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think that's clear. And I will say Durham Academy does not emphasize that as much as other tours that I went on. They want your kids to be prepared for life, happy, more productive. So if anyone is listening from Durham Academy, we love you and I'm not throwing you under the bus. But, it's part of the culture there, that I think the parents still have that expectation, and when I talk to parents of freshman or sophomore, they sort of have those expectations, like, which one is it going to be, Harvard, Princeton, or Yale? And I'm just going to yeah, that's great. Good luck, Yeah, I just think if you're going to send your kid to a private school, it has to be because you believe they're going to get a certain type of education, a quality of education, or maybe it fits in with your values, and you can't expect it to change things on the college side necessarily. It might change their life just because they have better work habits or they've been exposed to more ideas. And so like if you take a long view, yeah, it's probably, beneficial in lots of kinds of ways.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of what will be a 4-part discussion. And we'll pick up again with private school entitlement. So we have more to say about that when it comes to building a college list and expectations. So we'll finish this next week and we'll go on to point 4. Hope you'll join us.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
And we have a brand new interview, and it is with a legend in the world of admissions, Andre Phillips, who is about to enter year 40. And he is the director of admissions at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he'll be helping us to understand UW-Madison. It'll be a 4-parter. Friends, you're in for a real treat today. You're here with someone I've known for almost 20 years. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Andre.
Mark, it's great to be with you.
Well, our regular listeners know that Susan Tree and I used to run a big multi-state, multicultural college fair back in my Westtown days. And we started planning that back in 2003. And Andre's been a keynote speaker for us and regular consultant, someone who I love to talk with, and recently had the privilege of seeing again, both at College Board and at the NACAC conference. And we've been talking about doing this, for 3-4 years now, Andre?
It just shows that patience pays off, Mark.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The best things in life are worth waiting for. So
that's right.
So Andre is the director of admissions at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he's quite a veteran and a pro in the field. Andre, give us your background. Tell us your history. Let our listeners know your various educational roles you've had over the last 4 decades or so.
Thanks, Mark. I promise to be brief because my favorite topic is me.
You and a lot of people.
That's right. That's right. Well, if nothing else, if I don't know anything, I know what I've done. But thanks for the question. And also, thank you so very much for doing this really important work on behalf of students, families, and those who support them. It's invaluable as we help young people and their families think about this journey, this educational journey that students are on. And I will say, Mark, I stumbled into my first job in college admissions, dare I say, more than 4 decades ago. And to the big deal is to be transparent. So I will not name names, but I will tell you, I had the really good fortune to befriend what I thought even then and to this day, giants in our profession when I was a mere pup. In fact, my first job out of undergrad was not in higher education. I was a community organizer, even though I didn't know it at the time. And I was working in the city of Chicago, where I grew up and where I took my undergraduate degree. And I just happened to be in a space where 2 folks who actually worked in the profession were together. And I sat just enthralled by how they talked about their work. One in the financial aid profession and the other in the college admissions profession. Fast forward, every opportunity I got, I started asking questions, and in time, a position opened up at the University of Chicago. Not being an alum of the university, my first thought was, well, there's no reason for me to even try. But I was encouraged to apply for a position at the U of C, and I was fortunate enough to be offered the job. And at that time, the 2 things that were most exciting to me, one, I was working where I grew up. And so I didn't have to pack my bags and move to another town, to another city. And 2, I learned that admission counselors then also did a bit of recruitment. And that meant that I would be able to take a credit card and go rent a car and drive to these incredible cities. And I, as a kid who grew up, being the first in my family to go to college, I stayed home or in my hometown. I had never really traveled, and so this was the most exciting thing that a young 20-something could do. In my mind, was to be given a credit card that someone else would pay the bill. So let's start with that. Yeah. And I could get to go to places, and I really thought, as most 20-somethings were thinking, I imagine at that time, I could do this for a year or 2. It sounds good, and who knows? Maybe I find another job. Maybe I go back to school. I had my eyes were open to many things, and the fact that I was at this world-renowned university was really the topping on what it would mean for a professional. I'll fast forward and say 2 other things very quickly. Number one, of course, that first bit of imagination for me that I would do it for a while turned into 27 years at the University of Chicago. But I will tell you, in that time at this amazing university, I was given opportunities to build programs, to work with Nobel-winning faculty members, and in some ways travel the country and a little bit of traveling around the world to not only tell the U of C story, but to meet incredible young people, in many cases, who just simply needed an opportunity. And that was transformative for me in my educational journey, as well as the core work that folks are actually paying me to do.
So you have to make the transition to UW. It doesn't stop at Chicago.
You're very right, Mark. My story doesn't end at the University of Chicago. Chicago, however, was an excellent springboard for what is now more than 11 years here at the UW, or the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I will tell you, over time, and you know this all too well in our profession, you meet individuals who are doing the same work or adjacent work, and they become lifelong colleagues and friends. In fact, that is a part of our story. And it just so happened that during my tenure at Chicago, I was joined by a colleague at the time who stepped into a role that at one point I held. The two of us worked at Chicago for 12 years. And while there, we were able to do a number of things, not the least of which provide some fabric to our professional growth. Fast forward, my friend became the director of admissions here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And a few months after that, I then joined her here at the UW. And again, I had in mind, it's clear what the needs are. It's clear what the goal might be. I can get that accomplished in about 5 years, and then I will go off and do something else. And by now you have figured out that my pattern is say one thing, do another. And the other is I've now been here almost 11 and a half years. My dear friend moved on to a bigger and larger role in the California system, the UC system, and I moved up. So as for 5 years, I was the number two, as we say in this profession. When the number one moved on to another number one, I moved up. And so I've been in this role since August 2016 as the director. And just as there was frosting on the top of the cake at Chicago, there's been frosting and cherries on top of the work that we've been able to do here at the UW.
Well, nobody can accuse you of job hopping. You know, you go about 40 years in two schools. I used to say that about Susan Tree. You know, she was at Bates for 12 and Westtown for 27. I'm like, you know, in this day where people bounce as soon as something goes wrong, credit to you for hanging in there, both institutions, through all the triumphs and travail. So
yeah, well, thank you for that. I attribute it first and foremost to the good fortune of being at good places, working with extraordinary leaders from the president and the chancellor on down, and folks who, because of these venerable institutions and the leadership that allows those of us who are closer to the trenches or in the trenches to have the time to both learn and build. And it's been a staple of my career to talk about our profession as not just admitting admissible students, but how do you build enrolling classes? And that's been our focus. But it really starts with institutional leadership to recognize that you don't cut and run the first time you face a challenge, but that you dig in and you find ways to seek resolution. You find resolution and you build depth. And we've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate to have leaders who recognize as such.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Today's recommended resource is AskRose.org. Ask Rose is a free virtual homework helpline offering math and science tutoring for students in grades 6 through 12. The tutors are Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology students majoring in math, science, or engineering, and the program is certified by the National Tutoring Association. Ask Rose has approximately 100 tutors on staff, and they respond to an average of 150 calls, chats, emails, or video sessions per evening. They do take privacy seriously and will only ask for first name, grade, name of the school, and the class or subject in question, and the details of the problem. They'll also take textbook information if available, as they have an extensive textbook library they can reference. Tutors will work through the problems with students, but they don't automatically provide answers. Important to note that they work with students across the country, not just in Indiana, where Rose-Hulman is located. Current hours are when you'd expect kids to be working on homework, 5 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, Sunday through Thursday, and from early August through mid-May, so corresponding with a typical school year. Their toll-free number is 877-ASK-ROSE, and you can find more information at askrose.org.
So do you want to transition to Madison, or you want to take the institute?
Let's go to Madison.
Let's go to Madison. All right, let's go to Madison. There's a lot to say about Madison. So let's dive right in. Describe the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
So here are three things I think at that's top of mind, top of list for me. Number one, we are the land grant public university for the state of Wisconsin. We opened our doors in 1848 with 17 students. Here we are today with an undergraduate community of 33,000 students. When we add in our graduate students, our PhDs, we're a community just north of 49,000 students. We're a big place. We're not the largest public university in the country, but we're one of them. On the undergraduate side of the ledger, we offer 130 majors and over 70 certificates. As you know, Mark, there are some places that have majors and minors. Our a general way to think about our certificates, think about a major or think about a minor. It's a selection of classes that students take, and they're conferred a certificate. And what's beautiful, I think, in the certificate space, students don't have to stop at one, depending on how they have structured their 4-year plan. And so one other organizational piece I'll share, we are organized on the school-college model. So we have the College of Engineering, the School of Business, as an example. We have 8 schools and colleges, everything from our largest school and college that offers over 50% of our majors, the College of Letters and Science. So everything from African studies to zoology and a number of majors in between are found in L&S, as it's affectionately known here on campus. L&S actually offers over 85% of all of the classes. So students could start out in pre-business in L&S and then get admitted to the business school. They will have taken some L&S classes once they get to the business school. And it works that way with several of our other majors, including our nursing program, including our pharmacy and toxicology program. So we offer a lot. I make the argument as someone who came to the university some years ago, for young people who want this interesting mix of high-level scholarship, and we have extraordinary faculty members, and this engaging, dynamic community that sits a mile away from the state capitol, that participates at a tier 1 research level, that plays Power Five athletics at the highest possible level, where our women have national championships in hockey and volleyball. There is this unique and dynamic mix of how students in the classroom engage and study and learn. And as a dear faculty member will say, take full advantage of the opportunity to blow off steam in over 1,000 clubs and organizations, take good use of football Saturday and cheer like crazy for our women's volleyball team and everything in between.
I can see football was one of the things that got you from Chicago to Wisconsin. I love football analogies.
When I was in Chicago for a period of time, so Chicago plays in this incredible Division III University Athletic Association, probably the premier D3 combination of scholarship and sport. I tinkered around as the liaison and worked with our athletic department and the like. And I one of my first meetings here when I got to the UW, and I was meeting with some folks, and I started talking about what I knew about athletics, and the assistant AD happened to be in the room, and he just smirked. It was like, oh, look, he was like, son, you don't know where you are, do you?
You're in the big leagues.
I can't tell you how proud I was that I had touched athletics at the D3 level, right?
That's hilarious. So, Andre, what does UW-Madison do very well?
Thanks for asking, Mark. I think at the top of the list of things we do well that students don't necessarily recognize right away is their instruction is predominantly led by full professors. And for a school of our size, again, with over 30,000 undergraduates, that's a sizable faculty teaching undergraduates. We, of course, have graduate students who either lead some sections or on behalf of faculty, they'll lead certain portions of the class. We joint teach, but the fact of the matter is, an incoming first-time collegiate is likely to have faculty. And the other part of this, even though we offer a significant number of lecture-style classes, and we've grown in our undergraduate community, we still keep our lectures anywhere from 200 to 400. There might be a handful that are more than that, but there are significantly more of those courses that are less than 200 students. And so faculty engagement at the teaching stage as early as first year, that's something for an institution of our size I think we do really well. And the fact that we have a first-rate faculty with high expectations in the scholarly space is an important notion for students to know in advance, or certainly to be prepared for when they arrive.
Awesome. And as we know, no place is perfect. So Everybody's got a list of things they could do even better. What are those things for you guys in Madison?
So I think the number one thing that is a campus-wide discussion, we're PWI. And in the next breath, we talk about the importance of diverse voices and experiences that enhance the educational experience.
Let me stop you for 1 sec, Andre. Most of our listeners will know that term, but for those who don't, that's just an acronym for predominantly white institution.
Correct. And as a longstanding public flagship institution in a majority white state that's not overpopulated, if you look at the population of the state, we have to work and be intentional about how do we create dynamic voices of discussion, teaching, and learning. that is broadly representative. We've taken some important and good steps domestically, internationally, even, but we know there's room for more because, again, our belief is if we are broadly educating our students to be active participants and citizens in our society, there's exposure, there's learning, there's teaching that they need to be exposed to, and we're continuing to work on that. And we're not alone in that space. I have the good fortune when I visit with my peers at similar institutions around the country, we're all thinking about the dynamic of the educational process, the importance of diverse voices in those spaces.
Well, especially at this time, as everybody sort of expects Supreme Court to maybe put more restrictions on, and how that will flesh itself out in the ability to shape one's class. Wisconsin's not on that list of 10 states, has been prohibited by state legislature from using affirmative action, I believe, right? Aren't you?
Yeah, you're correct there. And I think two things related to that. Number one, we're not on that immediate list, but as many states have experienced or are braced for in a political process, you never know what the next election will lead to.
Sure, have to be ready.
So, the one thing I would say, and again, I don't believe we're alone here. We do not have our head in the sands, believing that this will pass us by. But in the next breath, I will tell you, we don't know, and I think many of us could argue we think we know where this is going. We don't. We don't know how the cases will be adjudicated, but we're braced to understand what the courts will ask all institutions to do. We'll do that. I mean, the last thing, and here I think I can speak on behalf of my brethren who sit in similar seats. We're going to follow the letter of the law. We feel good about our record historically. We know there's the possibility that we may have to think and work differently, and we will be ready whenever that set of those decisions are made. But yes, it is an interesting time for American higher education as we think about how do we educate our citizenry. And we know that our citizenry is a very dynamic and diverse cohort of learners. And we expect to be ready to be active in the teaching and learning space.
Friends, this concludes the first part. I hope you'll join us next week for the second part.
And now it's time for our College Spotlight of the Week.
Friends, Kevin Newton is doing a two-part overview of Australian universities, and then we will have one episode on New Zealand universities. Last week he covered part one, and now we will do the final part of his spotlight on Australian universities. I'm really curious about their admission process. What are they requiring to be submitted, and what do you find they're emphasizing versus we asked for this, but it really doesn't count that much?
It's very matter of fact, to be quite honest with you. Most applications are just asking for your ACT or SAT scores and your high school transcript. A lot of them don't even ask for a personal statement. They want to know what you're interested in studying, but it's possible to change your major.
Did they reveal, because I talked a lot over here about different terms like assured admissions and guaranteed admissions and admissions by the numbers and just quant-driven processes where people can know if they're in or not in. Is it similar there? Like, did they publicly let you know that we're looking for this SAT or ACT score and this GPA, or do they sort of, that's what they're doing, but they go to a certain extent to sort of keep the secret sauce secret, or secret sauce is too strong of a word, but the cutoffs.
Right.
They're not transparent with their cutoffs.
They definitely publicize that.
Okay.
And what I typically advise is to try to exceed it by a small margin, just because it's also that we don't want anyone getting weeded out or anything like that. Or because you're still doing university level work. And obviously some people don't test well. And there are occasional discrepancies. I think something increasingly I've found is, and Mark, I feel we've known each other long enough that I can get away with saying this, UK universities, European universities, and Australian universities don't always know what to make of AP scores. They think that, especially in the UK, they think that they're the same as A levels, and they're not, because typical student in the UK takes 3 or 4 A levels that they spend 2 years studying for. Some students that you and I both know have taken 3 or 4 A level or 3 or 4 APs their junior year and are taking 4 or 5 their senior year. So it's just, there are so many hours in the day. So typically what you will find is the Australian universities may not always accept either the SAT or ACT. You'll have to get a special waiver and they'll use their own concordance tables. So definitely take a look to see if you're interested at one particular Australian university. Go to the international qualifications page and they are very clear about what they require.
Would you say that scores count even more than grades? Like there are places that see scores as a common benchmark objective, and the grades are like, it's all over the place. We don't know if there's grade inflation here, grade inflation there. We've had some of those conversations off air. How does the standardized testing match up to the transcript courses selected and grades in those courses in terms of which they put most weight on?
So I think it does vary course by course and university by university, but what I've noticed is that the two tend to take a hand-in-hand approach, especially the more challenging your transcript is. If you've got honors and dual enrollment and AP or IB courses, those are going to stand out. And a word about IB is that they've got familiarity with that. So you may find IB students who are submitting with an IB diploma based off the results of their IB diploma may be better off to submit based off their ACT and transcript rather than their IB diploma. Simply because, again, we spend a lot of time talking about how important different perspectives are at a university level. And the Europeans and the British have done a pretty good job over the last 10 years of attracting American students and getting that American perspective. The Australians are just now cracking the code on how to do it. So you'll find some ability to shoot pretty high over there.
Kevin, you're an easygoing guy. You're like, I feel like I've been knowing you long enough. I can go. I'm like, okay, let me brace for this. He's gonna come with a wife joke. He's gonna talk about my brother, my kids, and then he came with something. Later. He came with something that couldn't offend anybody. But
you'd be surprised. Like some of my British colleagues, I'll say, you all don't know what you're doing with AP scores, and they get fighting mad. And pretty soon accusations of burning the White House and dumping of tea are made, and it's just not a good thing all around.
Point well taken. What have you found is the feedback from people that have actually gone? Like, what are the things they say either they like or they don't like or they wish they knew before they went? Like, just, I'll leave it wide open.
I think what you'll find is that it's definitely because the universities do tend to be bigger. And there's small cultural things too. I mean, the academic year is different, which throws people for a curve. And something I have noticed among students I've worked with is there's a lot of international orientation and new student orientation more generally held in, say, February. So the students who arrive in July and August feel sometimes they're missing out on that, or that they arrived either too soon or too late. So for a lot of students I work with who are interested in Australia, I suggest they take a gap semester and do whatever. I mean, hopefully they're not sitting at home playing video games, but to do something that, otherwise broadens their horizon, which tends to fit in pretty well with the demographic that tends to want to go to Australia, or for that matter, New Zealand, because they're more of an adventurous mindset anyway.
Sure.
The one thing I do want to just add real fast, even though we've moved on a little bit, is that, again, like in the UK and like in Europe, different degrees are going to have different entrance qualifications. So you can apply broadly into the arts or you can apply broadly into the sciences. And those two are going to have different qualifications. Again, they're fairly manageable, But if you're looking at studying, we'll pick on history majors because I'm a history major, or I was a history major. The requirements to be a history major at one of these places are lower than, say, the requirements to be a physics and astronomy major, because you've got to prove, as a historian, that you can do basic math and balance your checkbook. I'm underselling it there immensely, so please, any fellow history majors, don't come after me for that.
And that you might get.
Whereas a future astronomer might need a bit more, shall we say, nuanced approach to math.
Yeah, I mean, even here, a very selective school looking at history majors going to expect you to be quite accomplished, but in most instances, they'll still be seeing you somewhat through the prism of what you want to study. So, looking at things like English and history, possibly foreign language, but may get more emphasis than whether you got to physics C and got a high grade and got a 5 on an AP.
Right.
Because it's not necessarily a skill set that's necessary to be successful. But they will be expecting high performance. A selective school will be expecting high performance in classes like English and history. So it's just judging you by, the coursework that best correlates with what you'll be studying here.
Exactly. And I think that, again, just to shift over to those students who maybe don't know exactly what they want to study. I don't know, Mark, how you run into this, or how often you do, rather, but, I'll find a lot of students who I work with they want to go into the sciences, or they want to go into the arts, or they want to go into the social sciences, or they want to go into business. I'm working with someone right now who very broadly wants to study the sciences, and an option like Australia is good for him because he would major in a specific science: biology, genetics, physics, astronomy, whatever. But he's still got the opportunity to take a significant amount of his course load either in other sciences scattered throughout the curriculum, or to specialize in something else. So he could do biochemistry and astronomy if he wanted to. All that sounds dreadfully painful to, me as a history and language major, but he assures me it's all quite fun.
I just feel for young people when they apply in an environment where they need to know what they want to study. I mean, the average 30 or 35-year-old isn't sure that what they're doing now is what they want to do the rest of their life.
And, you kidding? I'm 36, and the most excruciating thing I have to do every week is come up with a meal plan with my wife. I mean, we can't decide what we're having for dinner next Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many choices out there of things to do that people are just, even adults, we spend the rest of our life learning about new careers that we didn't know about in their preparation. So I don't know how in the world a 16, 17, or 18-year-old is supposed to really know what they want to do, have a really good understanding of what that thing they want to do, what it's actually like, not, they see Law and Order and they think they're going to have these dramatic courtroom scenes, so they want to be an attorney. And then I don't know how they're supposed to know what all their other options are.
Right.
So let's say they find out, make up a situation here where their uncle's an architect and they get to hang out with him in the architect firm and they kind of like it. They think that's their thing. Well, okay, so maybe they know a little bit about that. They don't know about all the other things that they could do. And so, I don't know, it's just one of my pet peeves is when schools, and we have them over here too,
right,
that only admit by major and don't let you transfer internally very easily if you don't get it right. But I just think it's an awful lot to put on a kid.
Yeah, the healthiest approach I've found to that, and it's not a cure-all or anything like that, but is I tell students to kind of focus on what's going to help them learn to learn and what's going to grab their interest and help them pick up soft skills.
That's good advice.
I know a guy who's incredibly successful. Until recently, he was the CEO of a very large firm on Wall Street. And he said he got to where he is because he knows how to write. And it's, I don't want to share too many details because now he's
Sure.
retired and trying to live the dream. But he's he said, I got to where I am because I know how to write. And that wouldn't have mattered if I was a business major, a history major, an English major. You know, he thinks that the defining characteristic of his career was learning how to write. I know some other people who say it's learning how to get along with people.
Yeah, that's a big one too. That's a huge one. You know, I was working with a pastor a while ago, and he had 3 kids, and he had 2 kids that were more the straight A kind of profile, and then he had a third one that was not. I mean, not a bad student, but more of a solid B kid. You know, there's some sprinkling of some A's in there. And he told me, he's also a West Point alum, but he told me that the one he's least concerned about of his kids was that one, because people skills, and that's something my daughter Karis is too. I mean, her people skills are just ridiculous, and it really can take you far.
It absolutely can. And I think that, you know, it's something, not to go too far into left field here, but we talk a lot about the importance of diversity and different opinions and things like that. And to me, that's one of the most just actionable ways that having different perspectives matters, is because you not only are exposed to them, you learn to, at the very least, get along and respect people who have those different perspectives. I mean, one of my best friends and I see the world completely politically differently. We're just going to leave it at that. You know, if he's listening, he's wrong and he knows who he is.
Call him out.
In fact, I might send him a copy of this once. Just
okay, call him out and put salt in the wound and stomp on him.
He's wrong, but I love the guy. You know, it's in spite of that. And sometimes because of that. And, you know, I think that that's one of the most important things that, you know, comes, whether your idea of different perspectives is going to, you know, the town down the street that, you know, you were high school rivals with for college, or it's flying halfway around the world.
But it also adds to the value that you get when you go to one of these places too. Because now you're coming back, whether it's a graduate school application and that's valued, or you're in a firm, in a corporate type environment. I've got to think most people will value that. Kevin, do you get questions? Well, if I go over there and I want to live over here, nobody's going to have heard of my degree. Is it going to transfer? Do you get that? I would think you would get that question.
I get it at least once a week. And, you know, I think that there are a number of different answers for that.
Mm-hmm.
First things first, you know, I have to choose my words carefully here. I think that we focus on finding the best fit, finding a place where students happy, but we also have to realize that happiness isn't just about their 3 or 4 years on campus. It's what comes afterwards.
That's a good point.
You know, you take a place like where I went to graduate school. Outside of the world of people who deal with international relations and international economics and things like that, no one's ever heard of the place. But you say so as to someone who's in the DC think tank group for the Middle East or East Asia, they know exactly where you're talking about. And I think that that's part of what matters, is making sure that it's the kind of place where it's going to help you more than hinder you. It's going to help you more than just those 3 or 4 years of having an adventure and saving money. You know, we don't just say, oh, you want to go overseas, then you should go to LSE, or you should go to Imperial, or you should go to Sciences Po. You should go to someplace that fits, but is also going to help you on your career goals. You know, it's something, because I think, as much as I don't want to drag anyone through any university through the mud or anything, it's really easy, you know, when you hear something about some of these universities overseas. And again, I'm going to have to choose my words carefully here. They're clearly marketing towards the American who wants to live abroad, but they're not offering the same value for someone who wants to come back, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
I don't want to necessarily call anyone out right now, just because I don't think that would be a very kind thing for me to do. But there are definitely places that I think are great for a study abroad, but I wouldn't necessarily want that name on my resume for the next 40 years.
I hear you. So listen, Kev, we do need to wind down.
Oh, yeah.
Lead us with a few final thoughts.
Yeah, I think that for someone who maybe is a little turned off by the European specialization, and especially by the testing requirements beyond, a 25 or 26 or so on the ACT, somewhere in there, some are as low as a 23, some get up to a 30, depending on where you want to go and what you want to study, but that 25 seems to be the magic spot. And who wants an adventure, who wants to explore, a society that's very similar to America, but very different at the same time, and also a country that's coming to terms with its geography as fate, to be quite honest with you. I think that an Australian degree is a great way to go about it. And, it's not necessarily what I would call always an economical option, but it's certainly cheaper than a number of programs here in the U.S.
Yeah, and that's always the benchmark to me. People are here, so, whatever you said, 36 or something, throw in living fees, this, that, the other. It's still, I was talking to a family recently, and they said we've made the decision we're not going to do Duke. They were interested in Duke, and it was financial. They're like, it's going to be $100,000 a year by the time you take 3% cost of living increases into consideration. And then I said, it's understandable. I mean, 84, I'm like 84,000 is a lot. They're like, not 84, Mark, 87. So I get it. It's all good. But listen, this has been awesome. I feel like we actually could do really almost a part 2 at some point down the road where we get more into very much into specific schools and when you would recommend one versus the other and that kind of thing. But we got a big world out there, so we got plenty of content to keep us going.
We didn't even scratch the surface of their neighbor 2,000 miles away, New Zealand.
Yeah, I tell you what, let's do New Zealand next week. Thanks again, Kev.
My pleasure, Mark. Take care, bud.
Friends, on Monday's episode, we've had several questions come in the last few days, so we'll start out by answering a question from a listener, and then we'll finish with the final part of our 4-part interview with Terry and Gloria Crawford, the founders of the EdTech company Initial View. And I close you out with a quote that's very deep, very profound. You might have to reflect on this to grasp all of the inferences. It's from a great missionary named Jim Elliot, and this is what he said. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.